Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another C Squared game recap. It is the sixth game of the World Championship match between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Ding Liren, and I have to say this is probably the bloodiest match we have in history of chess. And today, to be honest, probably might have been the most aesthetically pleasing finish to a game in World Championship history. To join us and tell us more about this, we have our Grandmaster in Resident expert, PhD in chess, World Championship challenger, however you want to call him. Fabiano, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. It's going all right. Yeah, it was a very interesting game today. We say that every day, but it's true every day. It's somehow these guys don't seem to be boring us.
Absolutely
With any,
not.
I have to say, like, World Championship games are almost never boring. And we did have one game which was a draw in this match, which was relatively without huge content, right? If we remember, where this Queen's Gambit declined Carlsbad, where Jan had the white pieces. Not so much was happening, but it's always interesting. But since then, we've had a lot of action, a lot more action.
So much action today. Let's get straight into it.
Yeah, so Ding started with the first move d4, and we have said that he's a closed opening player, so he'll play d4, he'll play c4, but he doesn't seem to be wanting to go into e4 territory, which is more Jan's territory.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I suspect that will persist for the rest of the match, although you never know. We have already seen some surprises, and I would have to say the opening today comes to me as a surprise. And that's because it was the London system.
Oh my goodness, we have a London calling.
Yeah,
it brings you back memories, yeah?
Well, yeah, maybe of the city, but we didn't play the London in any game in that match. Neither I nor Magnus decided to play it. Although you do remember, of course, that before the match we were checking it quite a bit, and it is a very serious opening. Thanks in large part to the work of a few players. I want to say, if we're talking about the players who revitalized the London, probably the first person who comes to my mind is Alexander Grishuk. Mm-hmm. He's the first person I think who breathed some new life into the opening. And then I would also say Gada Kamsky for God knows how long he's been playing the London at a high level. You know, maybe over 10 years. I think he was an E4 player before that, but Gada, and the third player I would mention is Magnus Carlsen.
I know it personally with Gada. He bit me so many times in the London with the white pieces. It's like he plays these very dry positions and you feel like you equalize, maybe you're even better, and then suddenly you realize you're in fact just simply worse. You got outplayed for the last 10-20 moves. It's a very weird feeling, very weird opening, I have to say.
Well, Gada has a very refined positional feeling, so he can outplay you, even though he's not at his peak for sure, compared to when he was like number 3 in the world, let's say, or when he was even playing, was very close to a world championship match against Veselin Topalov in 2010, or you could point to the mid 90s when he was certainly one of the best players in the world, but okay, so he's definitely a big expert of the London, and today Ding played the London.
Yes, bishop to f4 at move 3, and we have c5, an early attack in the center by Jan, e3, knight to
kind of the main move these days, c5. I mean, I have to say e6 is also a fine move, very often followed by bishop d6 or c5, and bishop to f5 is a fine move, and if you want to equalize in a super precise way, maybe bishop f5 is a very good way to do it, because you're copying your opponent. So white cannot really count on a positional advantage. White has to basically count on having an extra tempo.
Yeah.
Like c4, e6. I think we even discussed this a bit recently because Hikaru played this line against me in a Title Tuesday, and we were discussing it a bit. So, and I see that like Hikaru has played it more than once recently.
Yeah.
So bishop f5 is also a very serious move, but c5, of course, is probably the main line. E3, knight to c6, knight b to d2. Here there's a major branching point. This is where the theory branches off into. Actually, I have to say, knight c6 also, the theory did branch a bit off there because black has the opportunity to avoid knight c6 completely by playing e6, followed by, on move 4, e6, knight bd2, and then followed by bishop to d6.
Yeah. Try to exchange bishops ASAP.
Yeah, and this is also a big line. So black basically has many ways to play, but all of them are a fight. It's not like black has one path which kills London. If I wanted to point to the one path which might, kill the London from a theoretical point of view, it's actually on move 5. After knight b to d2, it's move queen to b6. And not many people like to go for this, except for Ding, ironically.
With the black pieces.
Yeah, the reason people don't like to go for it so much is because it's very sharp and you have to remember a lot.
Yeah.
And the London, because
it's something like d takes c5, queen takes b2, something like bishop to d3, if I remember correctly.
I think first queen b2, rook to b1.
Rook to b1,
queen to c3.
And now bishop b5 or bishop d3. Those are
and bishop b5 options. Is interesting because now black has either g6 or e6, and this is a big theoretical position. I remember there was a speed chess championship match on chess.com where after e6, Levon was trying against Ding.
That's e6 at move 4, yeah?
E6 on move 8 in that position that we just saw.
Got it. So you want to start with queen to b6 first.
Yeah.
At move 4.
On move 5. Queen to b6.
So after c5, e3, what would you play now?
Knight c6.
Knight to c6 first. Okay, got it.
Knight b to d2, and move 5, queen to b6.
Got it. Yeah.
This is like the line that I would say is probably equalizing in a way that white maybe can't really find new ideas. But black has to remember quite a lot. And so the game I just mentioned, Aroni and Ding, was where Ding was black, and that's why I kind of mentioned it, is dc5, queen b2, rook b1, queen c3, and bishop to b5.
Yeah. E6.
E6. G6 is also a very fine move, played by a lot of good players, including Grishuk. I mean, G6 is super tough to find ideas against, but E6 is, let's say, maybe the main move by amount of games played. Short castle. And the point is black really can't safely take the pawn on c5 for various reasons, just very tactical reasons, but black does play bishop to e7. And white plays e4, castle, e5. This is all tactical. Why black can't take on e4, and why white is able to play that move. And then after knight d7, the c5 pawn falls, and white tries to basically use the e5 pawn to get some sort of like pieces to the king side quickly and start an attack. And this is Aroni and Ding. It's also a game Ferrugia So and so on. And it's a very big theoretical position, very theoretically relevant one for the entire London, in fact.
Yep.
But Jan didn't want to go for that.
No, he decided to go c takes d4 at move 5, e takes d4, and now bishop to f5. And just as a parenthesis, I listened to the post-game interviews with the players, and Ding did mention that he played London without actually having too many ideas in the opening of what to play, and he was out of book after bishop to f5, which is a bit surprising, but not totally surprising.
Yeah, to me it's very surprising. I don't know, because okay, queen b6 is one of the main lines, but by amount of games played, maybe cd4, ed4, bishop f5 is just as much up there in terms of main lines. It's basically one of the computer's main recommendations, one of the lines which was played by many strong players. For example, I think when I was playing the London in some blitz games, I think this is how Grishuk played against me in some like either blitz or rapid. And in that game, after bishop f5, I played c3 like Ding, e6, and I played queen b3, and this was supposed to be the way that you played bishop against bishop f5. And then Grishuk came up with this bishop d6. It's a pawn sacrifice because you allow queen takes b7.
Yes.
Bishop f4, queen c6, king f8, but black gets very good compensation. And this was sort of a new idea at the time, if I'm remembering correctly. So bishop f5 has been a main line for a very long time, for many years now.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm sure even though when Ding says he wasn't really ready for it, he probably means, of course, he has knowledge of it, but he hadn't maybe checked the
Before the
theoretical
game.
variations right before the game.
Correct.
Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe he was thinking something else was more likely from Jan. And to know what he had expected, I would have to check Jan's opening tree and see what he's been doing recently against London, but uh, I guess someone can look that up and find out what he's been doing. So he played bishop to f5.
Yes, bishop
which is kind of like after bishop f5, bishop b5 is a big move. I've played this myself. And the idea of bishop b5 is not connected with c3. It's more connected now with c4.
Ah, okay. So you set up this pin, and then you try to focus on the e5 square, get the asymmetric queen spawn, and try to go for the offensive.
Yeah, here is just black is still not developed. The king is still uncastled and will take a few moves to get castled. So after e6, white takes the time to try to punish black. Knight e5, queen b6 to deal with the attack on c6, and then c4. Basically counting that if black takes on d4, there's knight takes c6. And if you take on c4, then there's either a4 or there's bishop c6 followed by knight dc4, and black's structure is a little bit fractured on the queen side. But you did sacrifice the bishop there for it. But you gained a tempo on black's queen, so there's some trade-offs. There's some pluses and minuses.
Yeah.
Instead, they played more positional. c3, e6. Instead of this queen b3, like I played against Grishuk a long time ago, he played bishop to b5.
Similar ideas, just not following the c4 idea that you mentioned.
Like I'm seeing the games, and I see Godakevsky has played this, like half a dozen times. So this is Kamsky's preferred choice. Actually, the more I scroll through, the more games I see by Kamsky. So it's basically all games by Gada in this position after bishop b5. It's not as common as queen to b3. Queen b3 is a more commonly played move. And yeah, I don't know if there's any specific reason why bishop b5 is not so popular. I suspect it's just because usually it's connected more with, usually people connect bishop b5 more with knight e5 c4 ideas, not with c3. So,
and by the way, at this point, Ding already thought for more than 10 minutes, while Jan only thought for 2 minutes. So it kind of checks out, this idea that after bishop to f5, Ding was at least, out of today's book, today's knowledge, it seems to check out.
Yeah, it looks like Ding was not super. Maybe this whole London was just a stroke of inspiration and not some sort of deeply analyzed or considered repertoire for the match. I do have a feeling for this match that Ding is just not nearly as well prepared as Jan. That's my feeling.
Very likely, yes. Very, very likely.
It actually seems his preparation is really, really lacking, and somehow he's still getting chances.
He is, yes.
But but not because of the openings so much. Although he is still choosing lines where there's a lot of tension in the position, so he's making smart opening choices with white pieces, despite, I think, not having like a huge reservoir of ideas.
Maybe that's the new meta. Don't prepare for a World Championship match. Just play random openings.
I think he's prepared, but his lack of experience is definitely telling compared to Jan in some aspects.
Yeah. All right. Bishop to d6.
Bishop d6. Actually, I don't know if I like this move as much as like keeping the dark square bishops on. And I mean, I can't say bishop d6 is a bad move, but maybe bishop to e7 is a bit easier for black. I just like to keep the dark square bishops on because otherwise black's dark squares could really start to suffer, and that's actually what we see in the game. That black's dark squares start to suffer a bit. So instead, bishop d6, take, castle, very standard developing. Rook to e1, very standard developing. This position has been reached before, again, 5 times that I see by Godakevsky, and only 10 games. So, and here I think this is an important moment. Jan played the move h6, which is a very sort of natural move. Like, okay, you're just, giving the bishop a retreat square to h7. You're giving the king some luft in the long term. Just standard, semi-useful move. I think White's idea with the last move, rook e1, was very clear. Like, the rook on e1 is not doing anything in particular except supporting a knight e5 move. So, knowing that that's White's idea, if you're in black's shoes, maybe you would consider the move queen to c7, and I think that this is a more accurate move than h6.
Instead of h6.
Yeah. And after queen c7, knight to e5. If White plays knight e5, now black can take. We're still following a game of Gata. And now knight to g4. And the e5 pawn is attacked. To defend it, you should play knight f3. And now black has various ways. Like the knight on g4, if it was kicked back, with h3 to h6, then it would be obviously a bad piece on h6. But here black has f6, black has bishop to e4. There are various ways to keep putting pressure on the e5 pawn. So after 11, queen c7, I think White should not play knight e5. But then it's a bit of a difficult decision for White, because if you don't play knight e5, then you might struggle to find the next move. You can prepare knight e5 with queen e2, which is maybe the correct way to play. But to start with, it's already a slightly better version for black, for sure. Queen c7, queen e2 inclusion. And yeah, I just think that queen e2 is not such a simple or obvious move, and it would have definitely benefited Jan to give Ding some difficult decisions early on.
Yeah.
So h6, knight to e5 came. And actually this is where we go into new territory, because it was a game by Gata again, but Gata played the move a4, which to my mind is not really as direct as knight e5, not as good as knight e5.
Yeah.
So Ding played more precisely with knight e5. Now you can't take on e5, obviously, because d takes e5 comes. I mean, okay, you can kind of, like, you don't lose a piece because you have queen, let's say, to c5.
C5
but,
or b6.
Yeah, either c5 or b6, take on f6, take on b5, take on g7. You obviously don't want to do this to your pawn structure on the king side. Although, it's not like it's losing, but White will definitely try to play some knight b3, rook e3 stuff, and try to put some pressure on the king side and on the dark squares in the center.
Yeah, this doesn't look healthy for black. Knight e7, shied away.
Knight e7. Yeah, so it's basically White was trying to maybe take on c6 bishop, followed by knight b3, c5. We mentioned the dark squares can be rather weak in black's camp, so he preferred not to allow an outpost on c5. So knight e7 is avoiding the doubling of those pawns.
Yeah.
Sorry, not the doubling, but the, let's say, shifting.
The weakening, yes, of those pawns, and the loss of control over the c5 square, which I think is quite influential towards the assessment of the position.
Now Ding played a good move. I think he has a good feeling for this position, and probably has some familiarity with it. So he played a4. And the idea is White is probably not in a position to do anything on the king side. There's just too many black pieces there. There's no way really to play aggressively on the king side. So White should be playing on the queen side. To start with, White has an extra pawn on the queen side, so you might as well use that. And another factor, I think, is that the black bishop on f5, it's not really contributing to the queen side, while White's bishop can look over there and create some influence. So White is more naturally positioned to do things like a4, a5, try to get a knight to c5 via b3. It seems like White is the one who is going to benefit from some queenside play.
Yeah.
And now Jan played a move which I think is highly questionable. a6.
Such
it's actually,
a
I think,
simple move, yeah, and you don't like it at all.
I don't like it, and the reason I don't like it is because in the game, and we'll see what happened, White's pawn goes to a5. It fixes the pawns on a6, b7. If you keep it flexible, then after a5 you can have the option of b6 without allowing a takes b6, and you would have to take with the queen, and then you'd be left with an isolated a pawn. You'd be able to take back with the pawn, and you would have control over the c5 square, which is very important, as we'll see. The c5 square is a very, very important square. It might not look like a weakness now, but after a6 it can start to become a weakness.
Yeah.
The computer mentions a move queen b6, which I guess it's not supernatural. And after knight to b3, queen b6 looks like knight b3 is the most natural move. Then the computer plays rook f to c8. Again, not a move which maybe comes to mind. And, it's the main point of this, I think, is that black is not playing a6 because with the bishop on b5, white cannot play a5. So the queen on b6 can't be dislodged. And so you either have to take time to go like bishop to f1 or something, or if you play knight to c5, trying to get control over that square, then a6 comes and you actually lose the b2 pawn. So that's why the queen is on b6. But queen b6, rook f8, not something which immediately comes to mind for me, and I wouldn't dwell on this moment too much. But I definitely would avoid what Jan did next.
Let's see.
Which was a6, bishop
a6,
f1.
bishop f1.
And now maybe we could point to knight d7 as his next move was knight d7. That was probably the main mistake, but I could consider this like a chain of moves. A6 with the idea of knight d7.
This was his plan, yeah. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. If you start with a6, now you can play knight to d7 and not have to worry about losing a piece. So it's kind of his plan choice was already misguided. And this is something that he also mentioned in the press conference. It just felt like he didn't feel comfortable with the position. He said that I've played probably the worst game of my career. Obviously, it was some sort of an exaggeration, but at the same time, you can feel whenever you play a bad game, you can feel that just simply your choice of opening, your choice of middle game plan, your choice whenever you have to make an assessment in the position is just not there. It's just not right. And this is exactly the type of feeling that Nepo seems to be dealing with right now, in today's game.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's not an easy position. It's a very, I don't know where exactly it became difficult to play. I think maybe it might be connected to the early bishop d6 that made it a bit more difficult to play, and then the h6 made it a bit more difficult to play, and then suddenly you're in a slightly unpleasant position, which is probably objectively equal, but it's much easier for white, and white doesn't take any risk. White has more clear plans, and there's a lot of reasons why white is the one who can be preferred, definitely from a practical point of view.
Yeah.
So I actually think a measure was needed, which was after bishop f1, just play a5. Ooh. And yeah, you weaken the b5 square a lot, and white might actually try to maneuver a knight there, knight b1, a3, b5, even immediately knight b1 maybe. But at least you don't deal with the knight on c5. A knight on b5 is a bit less influential than the knight on c5 turns out to be in the game. So Jan played knight to d7, and yeah, this is definitely, we can point to this as an objective mistake. Not only a practical one, but this is already an objective mistake. Take and a5. And this is what I was referring to. The pawn on a5 is completely fixing black's queenside pawns, and black does not have a bishop to cover the c5 square. Like bishop on d6 would cover that square, the dark square bishop that he traded off.
You mentioned at the beginning of the game when he played the move bishop to d6 that was something you did not recommend specifically because of what just happened in this game. The loss of control over the dark squares on the queen side, highly influential.
Well, it looked like it was a group of decisions. That was the start of it, and then he somehow went for this position. It looked like he didn't even struggle with it. He just kind of went for it without any, trying to avoid this. He played a6, he played knight d7, all the moves which allow white without any thought to play a4, a5, and knight b3, c5.
Yeah.
So now he played queen to c7. And here, it's actually not so easy for white, but Ding played an excellent move. Ding played queen to f3, and I don't think this is an obvious move or an easy move, but it's a very good one. Because if you play knight to b3 immediately, it could be played in like a blitz game. Then after knight to c6, it's very difficult to get your knight to c5 in time. If you could get knight c5 b4, then black is basically positionally busted already. But you're not really in time to get that, and it takes a lot of moves, and in the meantime, while white makes those moves. And those moves might be, for example, rook to a2, queen to d2, rook e to a1, and knight c5. Black might get e5 in the meantime. So knight to b3 would actually be a significant mistake. And one of the reasons for that is after knight c6, if white plays queen to f3, for example, now, then black has bishop c2. So
Forcing.
queen to f3.
Forcing
that
the
would
knight to
just line
move
away.
and the loss of the a5 pawn. That makes a
Yeah,
lot of
suddenly
sense.
white is actually just worse down a pawn and so on.
Yeah.
So Ding played queen to f3, very, very good move. And the reason why this is a good move is for a few reasons. One is because he's preparing queen to g3 in many cases. And after the trade of queens, the a5 pawn is no longer much of a weakness, and white will be able to freely play knight b3 c5 and have a nice endgame advantage. The other reason is that it's actually preparing b4. And we mentioned b4 with the knight on c5 is a very nice sort of solid, stable bind that white has on the queen side.
Yeah.
But first you have to protect c3. So to protect c3, you play queen f3. You could follow up with b4, and then you can overprotect c3 with rook e to c1. So it's a very harmonious way of getting all the pieces in the right place to prepare this plan of b4 and knight to c5.
Yeah, very nice move. Very, very nice move by Ding.
This explains Jan's next move, which was rook f to c8. And this also explains Ding's next move, which was rook to a3. Although he also had a good move, rook e to c1. I think maybe he didn't want to allow e5. But e5 is kind of leading to an isolated pawn and not a particularly good one. So rook ec1 was also a very nice option here for white.
He played rook a3.
Rook a3, bishop g6. Okay, the computer is suggesting some kind of computerish ways of trying to deal with white's threats. One of them is bishop c2.
Yes. Which is kind of cartoonish, yeah, to put the bishop on c2 without any any actual attacks, immediate attacks. I mean, you can just attack it with rook to c1, and that seems to improve white's position, but in fact, it doesn't.
Yeah, the reason why is because black plays bishop g6, and black is saying, I don't have any ideas myself, but if you play b4, I will now take the opportunity while your pieces are kind of, your rooks are weirdly placed, a3, c1, and you played b4, so now I can play e5, take, and c3 is a bit of a weakness. And white is still slightly better, but maybe this is a better option than the other things for black.
Yeah.
And if white plays b4 after bishop c2, then black tries this queen c6, bishop to a4, bishop to b5. Because black would like to get that bishop into the game, and the bishop on f5, it's similar to Ding's bishop from yesterday. The bishop is not, it looks like a nice piece, but it's not really attacking anything, pressuring anything, or contributing to the position in a meaningful way. So rook to a3, bishop g6. I don't really think we can expect bishop c2, and I'm not even sure it's the best move. It's just a funny option from the computer.
The usual alien chess we've expected occasionally from the engines. Knight c6.
Knight c6. Obviously, Jan does not want to see knight c5 on the board.
Yeah.
Now we see the other idea behind queen f3, which is queen to g3 came on the board. And I think Ding would have been very happy with the endgame after queen g3, h3. His knight will come to c5. He will follow up maybe with b4. He'll follow up with f4, g4. He has both sides that he can play on. Queen side, he probably can't make a breakthrough, but he can definitely put his knight on c5 and keep black completely tied up there. On the king side in the center, he can try to arrange a breakthrough, maybe with f4, g4, and f5 someday. That would definitely come to mind as an idea. And maybe the d5 pawn becomes a weakness. I don't blame Jan at all for not wanting to go for this endgame. I don't think I would play it either. But the computer does say it's what you should do. And although it's definitely a worse position for black, it's not the end of the world.
Yes. He played queen e7.
Queen e7.
Now I have a question for you. Why not queen to d8? Because we've been touting this control over the a5 pawn. Why not just simply queen to d8?
So I think queen to d8 is simply met with knight c5. And if knight takes a5, then we have the knight takes e6.
Ah, so now we see the queen on g3. Multiple purpose piece.
Yeah, it's a great piece in many ways. It's both trying to trade queens, putting some pressure on g6, and so on, so forth.
Yeah.
So then the question would be, well, was the bishop bad on g6? Because Jan obviously voluntarily put the bishop there. But if he had put the bishop on h7, I'm sure he would have had some different tactical problems besides that. And you know, it's not like you put the bishop in one place and then suddenly all your problems are solved, right?
Yes.
Just because you can play queen d8 doesn't mean that black would be okay.
Yeah.
It just means that white would have to work a little bit harder to refute a move like queen d8.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Perfect.
queen to e7, h4. The point of queen e7, I think is pretty straightforward, but it is very interesting because it's kind of inviting the move knight c5. As you said, you took pressure off a5. So why not knight c5 here? And then I think probably what he planned is knight takes a5, with the idea if rook takes a5, there's b6. And obviously the exchanges of knights, the exchange of pawns, everything would ease black's defensive task enormously. But after knight takes a5, there is a move knight takes e6. And here I wonder if the players really went deeply into this position. I understand why Ding would not want to go for this, because why would you have a stable positional advantage. Why would you go for some complications? But it's very difficult for black, and probably the only move to maybe get a decent position is rook to c6. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, you want to take the knight is pinned, you want to take on e6 with the knight. I wonder if the players were looking in this direction at all.
My guess is that they briefly saw it, saw a knight landing on e6, all these discovery attacks, the fact that you cannot take easily on e6, probably stopped at this point. That's my guess.
But Ding decided not to go for it, so maybe he saw something he didn't like there.
Yeah, yeah. All right.
Ding played h4, and it's kind of funny. Like the move, I don't know if it would come to mind for me. To me, the most natural move is like rook a to a1, because I don't see what the rook's doing on a3. I just want to get it more into what I would consider the game to be.
Yeah.
And then I would think next move, like I improve my position slightly, and next move I'll think, what does my opponent do? King h7, maybe he'll play it, and then I'll think about which move to make now.
Mm-hmm.
Ding plays the moves h4, which is also like the computer says it's a great move. I'm kind of wondering if it's connected to this knight takes e6, and he thinks now there's some h5
with some attack on g7, right?
Yeah, some tactical possibilities in the future to incorporate this h5. And so after h4, which is a nice move, like really puts pressure on black, I think.
Yeah.
Jan played rook to e8. And now knight to c5 came. And now if knight takes a5, there's some tactics that work out for black. And I assume that the players saw this.
For white.
Some tactics that work out for white now. Rook takes a5, b6. And now, very important move. I mean, otherwise, I think white is not better at all. But there's this move h5.
It was all about that h4 move that Ding played.
Yeah. So this h4 also probably had some very direct, concrete idea that Ding was going for.
Yeah.
After h5, if bishop takes h5, I mean, the bishop has to go somewhere, and it doesn't. White responds to each bishop move in the same way, so black might as well take the pawn. There's knight takes e6. If ba5, queen g7, checkmate. If f takes e6, rook takes d5. And this position is similar to some other positions in the match from one sense. The material is equal, but the positional factors are not equal. Mm-hmm. After bishop to f7, rook to e5, despite the material equality, white is basically completely winning, just based on positional factors. The isolated e6 pawn, the weakness of the king, the relative strengths of the bishop, f1 versus f7, obviously. White's bishop is much more active. Mm-hmm. The rook on e5 being super strong outposted, and so on, and white is actually just in a winning position here. Mm-hmm. So knight c5 was a good move by Ding based on seeing these tactics, which I assume that he saw, but it definitely isn't like obvious. I think it does take some calculation to come to this conclusion.
Yeah.
Now, Jan recognized that after knight c5, white wants to play b4, and he's going to get squeezed.
Yes.
b4, a rook will come to, like the rook on a3 will try to maneuver itself to e3. And you don't see exactly how you lose this, but you do have a feeling that if you do nothing, you kind of lose.
Yeah.
And that's why he played his next move. And
E5.
I think the computer doesn't like it, but you kind of have to play it. Just from a practical point of view. It doesn't really, you shouldn't wait around forever. So even though it's a move that the computer is criticizing, I just think that it's a necessary practical decision. So e5, yeah, we go for it. We close our eyes and
yeah. You have to create something, right? Otherwise, you just simply get squeezed, as you mentioned. It's not a pleasant feeling. You know it's coming. You don't want to just wait. And Ding did it yesterday, right? With that rook c8, rook to b8, rook c8, rook to b8. and he lost in a pathetic manner, right? So Jan just simply didn't want to relive those same experiences that Ding lived yesterday. Makes sense.
Yeah, I think basically the computer can sort of deal with threats move by move. It can like, okay, you threaten, I'll wait passively. You threaten this, I'll deal with it tactically. You threaten that, I'll deal with that. Humans don't really work the same way.
No.
If you build up the pressure at some point, uh, you know, you make one threat, maybe I'll be able to find the response. Then you make another threat, I won't be able to find the response the second time around.
Yeah.
It's just that you're not going to be able to defend a position that does not improve. So your best bet is to try to improve the position. Either it deteriorates and you lose, but there are the chances that your position also improves because your opponent misses something. So that's what e5 is.
E5.
An attempt to break free.
Yes.
Here if white played b4, then basically the computer says you're kind of done. Mm-hmm. It's a bit surprising to me how bad it apparently is, but it's basically based on, okay, we consolidate the knight, and if you allow me to take on e5 next, the knight on c5, which attacks b7, a6, and then you have an isolated pawn on top of that, you have too many weaknesses and you'll probably lose this. And if you play e4, which I guess would have been Jan's idea, mm-hmm. then white plays f3, and follows up with taking on e4 at some point, bringing the rook around from a3, and slowly trying to pressure him to open e and f files. And again, the knight on c5 is just too powerful. It's all based around this knight. The knight on c6 is not even close to the same category of piece as the knight on c5. It's again a qualitative difference between pieces.
Yeah, I mean the knight on c5 is completely dominated. The knight on c6 is completely dominated. The knight on c5 attacks pretty much every single weakness in black's position.
Yeah, we talk about octopus knights. That's definitely an octopus knight.
Yeah.
So e5, b4 was a correct decision. Ding played rook to b3, and that was definitely not the correct decision for a few reasons. First of all, it's not the best move from an objective point of view, and also it allows Jan a very easy decision. I think we shouldn't be allowing our opponents easy decisions, and the easy decision is, if I don't take on a5, I resign. So I take on a5.
Mm-hmm. Rook
p5, queen f6, rook a3. Now it's a concrete position, and I actually think for the defensive side, you really love to get into those concrete positions. You can start to calculate your way out of it, maybe. It might not work out, you might lose, but at least you have something to calculate rather than just looking at your, depressing, positionally lost. You have weaknesses on a6, b7, and they never go away, and you just slowly get squeezed.
Yeah.
You much rather have this where you either lose concretely or you survive concretely. And Jan also said in the game in the post-game press conference, that he started to feel like his position was improving a bit. Mm. So, rook e5, queen f6, rook a3, knight c4, bishop c4, d4. These moves kind of came semi-forced for both sides because white had to deal with the threat to the rook on b3, black had to play knight c4, otherwise, you lose d5 pawn and so on.
Yeah.
So knight c4, bishop c4, d4. h5, it's actually quite an accurate move again. It's actually quite a serious mistake from Ding. And I think also it feels like he's doing something wrong because he was positionally winning. And now the only reason he would be better, because positionally he's not even better anymore, right? I mean, if black, let's say, had pawns on a5, b5, then we would say, okay, black has a huge amount of counterplay and it's an unclear position. Mm-hmm. He's only better because he can take up b7 and black's pawns are, for the moment, sort of hanging and weak. And I don't know why he didn't take on b7. I mean, okay, I can kind of guess that he was thinking rook e5, d5, queen b6, knight d6, queen takes b2, and he didn't like this. Mm-hmm. It turns out that the pawn e5 is very powerful, and white will gain very, very good threats against black's king, either with e6 or with f4, f5 at some point.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it was already difficult decisions, right? He definitely put himself in a position where he had to make some tough choices. Knight b7, it's definitely not such an easy choice because you see that b2 falls, black has an a pawn in that position, the rook on a3 is attacked, and so on.
Yeah.
So, but h5 was really gave Jan a big chance, which he completely didn't spot, even in the post-game press conference. And when I was watching the press conference, I was kind of a little bit struck by how much Jan misevaluated this whole thing.
Yeah.
He was correct in that this moment he did have a chance. He was correct in that sense. He did have a chance at this moment, but the chance he pointed to was bishop d3, and he said that even if black is worse, he also said it might be close to equal, but he said that even if black is worse, it's certainly defensible. And the truth is that bishop d3, it is fine if you take on d3, because then the major piece endgames, the rook on a3 is out of the game, and black is basically concretely surviving.
Yep.
But white has this like just winning move, b4, and certainly not to suggest it's an easy move, but once you see it, basically the pawn on b2 is a weakness, the pawn on b4 is not a weakness, and now the main features of the position are how a6 and b7 will just fall at some point, how the bishop on d3, similarly to the game yesterday, it's like almost a repeat of the game yesterday. The bishop on d3 has no influence over the position.
Yeah.
And there's not much else to say. Black will lose the b7 and a6 pawns. Black will lose the endgame. The bishop on d3 doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
So that was a major misevaluation. And then Mike Klein mentioned the correct way that black should play his position, which is very difficult, I think, to spot, because let's say rook takes c5 is calculated. You might easily, many people might easily either stop after d takes c5.
Stop after d takes c5, yeah.
Or calculate queen e7, which doesn't work out for black.
Yeah, you just take on g6, take on f7, the king is completely busted, right?
Yeah, and for example, I mean, you have a bunch of good ways, including e6, but you can also just maneuver your rook back, and the fact that your king is open is actually very long, and the past e-pawn especially, very long-term advantage for white.
Yeah.
So
what
why
did
is
he
this
miss?
for black? Or why is it? It's not good, of course, but it's it's getting better. Rook e5, d5, queen d8. Brilliant move, and almost on the spot leading to a survival position, because if hg6, queen d1, king h2, queen h5, king g1 is a repetition, and queen h3 allows queen takes e5, dropping the pawn and the knight on c5, and black will actually end up a pawn. Although black will not end up really better, but black will no longer be worse.
Yeah.
So after queen d8, I think if you see queen d8, then you start to calculate this with all your power, all your might to survive this game.
Queen f3 makes a lot of sense, right?
White has to play queen to f3 to fight on for an advantage. But at that point, you're already like, okay, I'm forcing my opponent to make some difficult moves. And after queen to f3, black can play bishop c2 now with a better version of things that we'll see in the game. But there's also the move queen to d2, another tactical shot. So the point is, obviously, b2 is attacked. And this is kind of forcing white's hand, because you don't want to just drop your pawn, so you have to kind of take on g6, which obviously seems to just be winning a piece, right? But then black has the other idea behind queen d2 is queen to e1, king to h2, queen e5. Similar to the other idea, the knight on c5 is a loose piece that is dropping off the board, but in this case not as good. And I think maybe if you calculate this, you still are very scared to go for it, but you kind of have to go for it. This point, g3, queen c5, queen takes f7. It might be surprising to people that you take with the queen, but the pawn on f7, if gf7, king f8, the pawn is actually a weakness and will not be any sort of danger for black, and black is completely equal there. But after queen f7, king h8, it is terrifying in the long term, because your king is basically always in a mating net.
Yeah.
But you might see the threat of rook f8 and be very inspired by that idea. And indeed, white, to avoid this rook f8 stuff, has to go on the offensive with rook to a4, with the point that, of course, b5 looks very good, but it's met by rook to a6. And importantly, there after rook to f8, white has rook c6. And here white will actually win a rook endgame solely because black's king ends up in that sort of mating net, which is a very long-term mating net.
Yeah. And you cannot approach the g6 pawn with rook f6 because you get checkmated on the 8th rank.
Exactly. But after rook to a4, black plays rook c8, and in this position, it is probably objectively a draw, and even more so it's very difficult for white to find a suitable idea here, because if you ever move the rook back to a1, there's rook to f8, which is obviously not what white wants.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to try to defend f2 with your king, but at king g2, there's queen c6, and king g1. King g1 might be the most natural move in that sense, but again, king g1 is already a difficult decision, and black is probably surviving with queen c7. So I think the point is not really the long variations, but just you're in a desperate situation with black. Yeah, if you see rook e5, d5, queen d8, you play it, and then you take it from there. First, you force your opponent to play queen f3, then we consider, and then maybe we calculate queen d2, and so on. That's how it goes. You of course cannot. Nobody can calculate rook takes d5 from move 27 up to move 37.
Yeah.
It's too difficult. But you can find the first two moves and then force white to think, and then take it from there slowly. This is basically how you defend lost positions or difficult positions, is one move at a time. But first you need to spot the idea.
Cool. All right. He
Jan
did not. He played bishop c2.
Kind of tragic mistake for sure. And he pointed to it as a mistake, just not exactly for the right reason. So knight takes b7 now. Queen to b6. Knight to d6.
That was a brilliant.
I saw this move
yes.
got like a lot of praise, but it's kind of standard tactic, I think. Like queen d6, rook e8 wins. So
and I'm sure Jan probably spotted it as well.
Yeah, I think these are elementary tactics for these players. Even in Blitzgame, I think they would both spot it pretty easily. Rook e5, queen e5. Basically, because of this, the move h5 was justified. Like h5 was a mistake, but only for one concrete reason. The knight takes b7 stuff is, of course, much improved with the bishop on c2, because it's simply completely out of the way compared to g6.
Yeah.
It's much less influential.
Yeah.
So rook takes e5, queen e5,
queen
b2, rook to a5. And one point is, it looks, and again, kudos to Ding for seeing all this stuff, it looks like queen takes c3 might win a pawn. And here there's only one winning move, but it's very effective winning move, which is knight to e8.
There's no way to defend on g7 except f6, but f6 queen to e7, right?
Or queen d5.
Or queen to d5, yeah.
Yeah, here's basically it's not like, I mean, queen d5, king h7, there's only one move to win, which is knight takes f6, gf6, queen b7, but I think once you see knight e8, the rest of the variations kind of are simple.
Yeah.
So that's why Jan avoided queen takes c3. He played the move king to h7. Good defensive move, very good defensive move, forcing Ding to find a very difficult move.
Which he did not, right?
Didn't. First of all, king h7 is defending against some kind of knight e8 ideas. Because now if you take on e8, it could be now, it could be later. Queen takes e8 is not with check, and this allows black time to play queen c1, king h2, queen f4.
Yes. And that's
so this is basically the first idea of king h7.
Yes.
And it's also preparing queen c3, because again, knight e8 would be met by rook takes e8, and there's no check on e8.
Yes.
So king h7 has a threat. It defends against white's threat. And in case white decides to greedily take on f7, this wouldn't be a very good move in many cases, because the pawn f7 is not really relevant. I mean, also queen takes c3 is possible here, but very specifically rook f8 would cause white a lot of problems, because the rook is coming into the attack. And again, this is not a position where white has any strategic, like, white is not strategically winning. This is move by move. You know, white either wins by tactics or black survives.
Yeah.
Black has plenty of trumps. The a pawn is a long-term trump. The weakness of white's pawns is kind of relevant. White's king is actually quite open, which will allow a lot of perpetual checks possibly, or even attacks in somewhere down the line. So the only winning move for white after king h7 is move queen d1, which on the one hand I can say, yeah, it's, you know, I can say it's simple, defense c3. On the other hand, it's not simple, because you don't want to, like, you feel like you're attacking, you don't want to go on the defensive all of a sudden.
Yeah. I mean,
If you see it, probably recognize the strength of it, but first you have to kind of consider this move.
and the queen on e5 is so well placed, and it has been so well placed and so useful for the last few moves. All of these attacks with knight to e8, that queen on e5 was always involved into the attack, and now to drop it back to e1 for a defensive task, it doesn't feel natural, right, in the heat of the moment.
It doesn't feel natural, but it's the only winning move, and I don't know if Ding considered it, rejected it, or if he just didn't consider it, but certainly it was the best move. And if black plays bishop d3 to defend c4, first of all, white can take on f7, but that might not be super clear because we said the f7 pawn is not really the most relevant.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually defend black's king.
Yeah.
More relevant is that we need to get our own pawns pushing. And so the way to do that is we take on c4. In fact, the pawn was not defended because bishop c4, queen e4 wins the rook on a8. And now, after we've taken the c4 pawn, our own c3 pawns will start to move forward.
Very nice.
Knight d5 will come next, and then these pawns will have the mobility to go. So queen e1 was very strong. Instead, Ding played rook c5.
And he played it fast. He played it in about 40 seconds. So he probably had this planned out for
How much
a
time
while.
did he have?
He had 20 minutes at this point. 20
played
minutes for
very
9
serious?
moves. Yes, and he played it in 45 seconds. Rook to c5.
Okay. Yeah, I guess these guys are quite confident. I mean, it's a really complex position. I'm surprised that he played so quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe he was just getting worried about the position remaining complicated. And with the time dropping down, you generally don't want to leave too many moves before the time control with only a few minutes on the clock. And
sure,
he was just definitely tempted to maintain the momentum towards the attack, right? Rook c5, you see rook c7 create this battery on the 7th rank between the queen and the rook. And, you know, it's tempting. It's definitely visually tempting.
Yeah, no, it certainly is. But so I'll just point out that black has one very good move here, which saves the game. But for example, if I haven't calculated rook c5, if I've only spent half a minute on it, like apparently Ding spent half a minute. Rook c5, a5. It turns out that rook to c7 is not actually super clear, because after rook c7 there's queen c1, king h2, queen g5, and in the endgame the a pawn is quite dangerous itself, and will most likely cost white having to blockade it with the knight, which might be winning for white, might not be. And if you don't play rook c7, you play knight takes f7, which the computer likes the most. a4, rook c7, queen c1, king h2. Although it's winning, it's kind of a very, very complex sort of win, because black has rook to e8 here, and if you take, there's queen to f4, and if you go back to g3, again, the complications to a computer, they're simple. To a human, definitely not simple. Like queen g3, rook e1, queen g4, some kind of, long and difficult lines.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that after rook c5, black actually has a very, very decent move, which is queen takes c3. And I'm curious why Jan didn't play this.
Maybe rook to c7, or let's say,
yeah,
so what's the point behind, let's say I start with rook to c7.
Well, the point of, I don't think we need to talk about the point of queen c3 because it wins a super important pawn. The point, it's more like what's white's point behind, because
what's your defense, I guess. It's the better question after rook to c7.
So rook c7 is probably what Ding planned, and it looks very natural, but there's simply queen to d2, queen to d2, and rook takes f7, threatening checkmate.
Yes.
And here, okay, so you can play queen g5 first. The computer, for some reason, wants to provoke the king to h2 and then play queen g5, but let's say queen g5 first. And I've defended against your mate, and I have 2 passed pawns.
This is scary. Example, this looks scary.
You can play knight c4, queen takes c5, and d takes e5. And you're up a pawn in endgame, but let me just make an argument that black has multiple ways to draw, and it's actually not difficult to see that it's kind of going to turn very drawish. For example, bishop to b3, rook to c7, a5. Let's say the knight has to go to a3, a4. And in this position, your knight is sort of stuck there. Okay, I'm not promoting my pawn because of this knight. but then I also can't move without allowing the a pawn forward.
Mm-hmm.
And your pawns can't move. E6 drops a pawn. F4 would allow some kind of like, let's say, rook to F8,
Yep.
maybe. And actually, after F4, I think black has abundance of moves, but and white doesn't really have a way forward.
Yeah.
I mean, black has ideas of rook D8, rook to D1, rook to A1, things like that. White's plan's less clear, so black will most likely, I think, 95, 98% be able to draw that position.
Yeah. Cool. He played.
And there are more complicated positions, complicated variations like knight takes F7 after queen C3, but it's a little bit of a chaotic stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's clear that if you see this idea of queen D2, queen G5, you just kind of go for it, and yeah, we'll take it from there again.
Pick up a pawn in the process.
Instead, Jan played the move queen C1, which I don't understand it so much.
And he played it. He didn't play it fast. He did think for almost 10 minutes at this point. And he came up with this decision to go for queen to C1.
Yeah, I have to say, the pressure is definitely very intense, especially you're defending all game, and you probably thought you were losing all game, and suddenly there's a chance, but you don't know that there's a chance. It's very easy, of course, for us to say there's a chance seeing the computers.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I would expect at least the moves to kind of come with some kind of clear idea, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes they're making mistakes that don't really seem to have. I mean, maybe he was kind of looking at this game and this line that was played in the game, and thought it kind of works out. But again, it makes Ding's moves very easy. Like King's H2 is simply forced. He played F6. Obviously, he's trying to kind of avoid any kind of knight takes F7, rook C7 stuff, so he played F6.
Mm-hmm.
Queen drops back to G3. That's where the queen obviously belongs because you stop queen F4, you still keep an eye on G7. And now probably he thought, okay, I play A5, and if rook C7, I have queen G5. And maybe he was thinking that this was a clever defense. Mm-hmm. In reality, the A pawn is not worth as much as he thought. And white is actually, like this queen on G3 is very consolidating. And now knight takes C4 came. Mm-hmm. A4. I guess Jan was counting on the pawn. Mm-hmm. It turns out that this pawn is, it's a good pawn, but it's not as dangerous as the attack against black's king.
Yeah.
I think after knight to E3, it becomes clear that things are really not going very well for black because knight to E3 is stopping queen G5. So now if A3, rook to C7, rook to G8, you're forced to put the rook behind. And with the rook behind, I no longer really support the A pawn. And after rook to A7, for example, I'm not really supporting this pawn, and I can't move it forward so easily. Besides rook A7, there's also very strong knight D5 with the threats of knight takes F6. And if queen G5, it doesn't stop it because take on G5, take knight F6, followed by knight takes G8. So I think maybe if Jan had seen knight E3 in advance, he would have rejected this. But again, this queen C1, I can't really pin down his thought process because it feels a bit like he wasn't looking at the position fully concretely. He was kind of going by intuition a little bit.
Yeah.
That's my feeling, at least.
Yeah.
So after knight to E3, 36, bishop to B1, rook C7, rook G8, I think this is already a very clear sign that things are basically wrong for black because you're not going to promote your A pawn with the rook on G8 while white can combine attack against black's king with controlling the A pawn.
Yeah, and everything is forced at this point. It becomes very concrete, very forced, very straightforward, easy to calculate for Ding.
Well, knight D5, yeah, he played very, very straightforward, easy to see this move, and then see that black is forced to play king H8 to stop knight F6. Now rook to A7, he's controlling the pawn. He's also kind of forcing A3 because if you lose this pawn, there's really not much more for you in the position.
Yeah.
And very importantly, in various positions, if queen D1, attacking H5 and defending A4 is met by F3, and this queen sort of becomes blocked out slowly. It's not supporting the A pawn anymore. It doesn't allow A3, and it doesn't attack H5, and so kind of slowly white is getting control over the position.
Yeah.
Jan played A3. clear. Okay, he's counting on one thing now. He only has one thing going for him. Obviously, his king is under attack. He's down material. His rook is passive, but he does have an a pawn, so he's going to push forward.
Yeah, yeah.
Knight to e7. Very clear idea. Attacking the rook. Rook to f8.
Mm-hmm.
Here, white has various ways to win. Because you kind of have this mechanism, always that you can go back and forth with the knight attacking g7. So it's clear that something like black's defense is a bit too thin. It's just resting on this one rook. And if you remove this rook in any capacity, basically you just win the game.
Mm-hmm.
One easy way to do that is to move rook to b7. And I saw like kind of this discussion by Anish and David Howell. Is rook b7 a move which even comes to mind? If it comes to mind, I think you kind of immediately see a2 rook b8. And if you take its mate,
yeah.
If you queen again, it actually allows a beautiful checkmate, but not one which is too difficult because white has many ways to win. Rook f8, king h7,
Rook
and
h8.
because
Queen g6.
I like queen g6. I like queen g6.
Of course, of course.
But rook h8 is checkmate, and there's actually other ways as well to win because like knight g6 wins and so on. Because black's queens, because of his bishop on b1, they actually don't create threats yet, so white has a lot of time.
That is actually a very funny position. Yeah.
So rook b7, black has no way to stop rook b8. So the only discussion between Anish and David Howell was, do you even consider the move rook to b7? Because let's say we have like a tree of variations that we calculate. And usually you would not calculate a move which, if there's a passed pawn and your rook is behind it, you move your rook away from the passed pawn.
Yeah.
And I think this move would come to mind for me rather quickly for some reason. I don't know why, but to me it kind of feels natural because I would just think about removing this defender of the rook on f8. But I can understand why it might not come to mind for most people. And in fact, Ding played something which is arguably more beautiful, a more beautiful way of winning.
And it's worth pointing out that we are now at move 40. They just made the time control. Ding got an extra hour on his clock. He had an hour and 4 minutes. So at this point, he just like stopped and thought for a while and made a very nice move, we have to say. And by the way, keep it going, Fabi. You say.
Yeah, so before we say his move, I'll say one other move for white on move 41 is queen c7 with the threat of knight g6, threatening queen takes g7. King to h7, defending against the threat. Knight to g6, again threatening knight f8 or queen g7 checkmate. Rook g8, only way to defend the threats. And here, I think Ding was searching, like, how do I win? And then he came up with the idea of queen to f7. And he was thinking queen f7, some move, queen takes g8, king g8, rook a8, king f7, rook f8, and king escapes to e6. And the truth is that after queen f7, that move which survives for black is queen to g5.
Yes.
And if you take on g8, yeah, the king escapes to e6.
Yes.
And obviously you shouldn't be sacrificing your queen unless it's for checkmate, right?
Yeah.
So I think he basically saw this, and then he thought of two moves. The reason why he didn't think of rook b7 was because he first thought queen c7, because it's obviously a very direct way to try to win. And then he was like, oh, I'll amend this by first playing d5.
Brilliant.
After d5, the only move that you kind of calculate for black is a2, because again, black is counting on one trump, which is the a pawn. a2, and now he started calculating, oh, I'll play queen c7, king h7, knight g6, rook g8, same line, queen f7. And no matter which move black makes here, let's say queen g5, white takes on g8, king g8, rook a8, and wherever the king goes, let's say to f7, rook f8. And now there's no escape to e6 square, and this becomes checkmate.
Yes.
And this is why on move 41 he played the move d5.
Yep.
After d5, Jan played a2. Ding played queen c7. King h7 to defend against knight g6.
Knight g6.
Knight to g6 anyway.
Rook g8.
Rook to g8 to defend queen g7. Queen f7. And here Jan resigned because, as we said, queen takes g8 is coming. There's no way to stop it. The only way to stop it is bishop takes g6, I guess. But then there's another mate, hg6, king h8, queen takes g8, king g8, rook to a8, checkmate. So dual mates based on the domination of the king, the mating nets around black's king.
Yeah,
And that's why after queen f7, Jan resigned.
absolutely brilliant game by a Ding. We cannot take anything away from him. Look, it wasn't maybe the most clinical, most precise execution by a Ding, but he kept the tension. He slowly increased the pressure, and he got the job done. He got the job done in style. So I have to say, a very nice game. Sure, you could point to the fact that Nepo probably had the worst game of the match. It was much worse than his first loss. It didn't even feel like he had any chances, except those lines that you were pointing out, very concrete, very tactical. But if you don't spot that, then, and he made some very inaccurate and questionable strategic decisions as well, which probably was his downfall, starting with bishop to d6, you nicely pointed out, and then a6. Moves were just simply not tying together very well in this game for Jan. So difficult defeat, but again, it's probably I don't know. Maybe you can tell me if I'm missing something, but at least in the first 6 games, it probably is the bloodiest World Championship that we've had ever in history. Am I correct about that?
I um
We have
I don't know, because there have been a lot of World Championship matches. Nothing that immediately comes to mind in terms of this level of decisive games,
yeah.
and also not with no domination, right? I mean, there have been some dominating World Championships in the past. This is just back and forth.
Back and forth, yeah.
It's
yeah.
quite unusual. In the modern era, obviously, we have had back and forth matches, but they're usually like someone wins, 3 draws, someone wins, right?
Mm-hmm.
So not win, loss, win, loss, win, loss. About this game, I don't think it's the worst game of the match, because I still think Ding's game 2 with white is kind of bad
Mm-hmm.
on every level.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't lose like that with white,
Yeah.
especially at this level.
Yeah.
But this game, so after like every game, every decisive game, I think we've said like one side is playing brilliantly,
Yes.
and that's like remaining true, that Ding can be proud of his game. But I'm starting to wonder, like, yeah, I guess the level is quite high, but on the other hand, these guys like don't defend whatsoever. And it's hard to defend. I wonder if it's because of the pressure, but like they don't even grab a single defensive chance.
Okay, that's an interesting point. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just looking at this game, and okay, I don't know if Jan was in time trouble after h5 when he had this idea of rook takes c5 and queen d8.
He was never in time trouble.
And I know that's not an easy one, but then he also had queen takes c3, and I guess he wasn't in time trouble there as well. On move after rook c5.
He was never in time
32.
trouble. No, I think he reached 40 moves with close to 20 minutes or something like that.
So it's like, yeah, I mean, we can continue with the narrative that like that one side is always playing brilliantly in one game, and it's back and forth, but you have all the time in the world, and you have 2 chances which are both objectively kind of drawn, and your position was losing before that, objectively losing. So I don't want to say blunders, but with rook c5, the valuation actually swings from objectively winning, to objectively drawn.
Yeah.
And likewise with h5, the evaluation swings from objectively much, much better for white. I don't know if winning is maybe too strong a word for that moment, but to objectively, rook takes c5 is a draw. Okay, this is a very difficult moment, but you're getting multiple chances and you're not taking a single one of them. Similarly, yesterday, like Ding had multiple chances and didn't take even a single one. And again, if you take a chance and then at some point, like later on, it becomes difficult, but you at least have to first take the first step towards that chance, first step, and then you'll take it from there. And maybe if he had played this 95, it wouldn't have remained simple. It would have remained very difficult, and I'm not saying he would have 100% survived, but okay, you first take that chance, and then if you screw up later, you tried. But this is more like kind of marching inexorably towards defeat. It feels like not really putting up serious resistance. I don't feel like not taking your time at least. Like there's no desperation in this fight. There's no desperation that like I need to take every second I have to
To
try to
find the right
survive this.
defense. That's a very poignant point that you're making. Definitely their defensive task are subpar, at least to their standards and the standards of a world championship match. Definitely something that the players can work on. One final question that I have for you before we sign off is this new detail that came out about Nepo's camp, and it's about Vladimir Kramnik. Supposedly, he is the coach heading the delegation for Jan's team. What do you think of that? Do you think those rumors are accurate? Have you heard anything about it?
Well, I just saw what was said, which I don't know if it's based on something. I guess it should be based on something, right? So
There
I don't
was
know.
it was actually mentioned in passing in some sort of an article in a Russian media journal or something along those lines. It was just completely mentioned in passing, like some random question, and then yeah, Vlad is the head of the delegation, or of the head of Jan's coaching um, group.
Yeah, I don't know. I obviously have no insight into this personally. Uh, but it's just funny to me how like every single time it's like there's always some rumor that Vladdy is working with someone. Like during the candidates, the rumor that he was working with Ali Reza, and now the rumor is that he's working with Jan. I mean,
He's always there.
it's quite remarkable. It's he's always. I remember when there was like this Vichy Topalov match, and at the time Veselin was sort of the the bad boy of the chess world because of his match with Kramnik
Mm-hmm.
from 2006, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the whole Toilegate thing, right? And he was obviously the villain for a little while
Yeah,
there
yeah.
after that whole thing. And then there was like Anand was playing Topalov, and then there was rumors that Vichy is working with Kasparov, and Vichy is working with Kramnik, and then Vichy is working with like some supercomputers, and it felt like suddenly the entire world was working with Vichy, and there was all these rumors, and it's always funny to me when there are these speculations,
Yeah.
because of course you could have Kramnik on your team, you can have Gary on your team, you can have the ghost of Bobby Fischer on your team, but regardless, you still have to sit down at the board and play. I don't think it changes a huge deal if you have one specific person. It's more like the more important thing is to have people that you like to work with, not to have like this. Obviously Kramnik is a legend of chess, and I'll say this any day, but that doesn't mean that he's going to give like the secret sauce that will make anyone world champion, right?
Yep. No, absolutely. Good points. Good analysis, Fabi. Tomorrow is a rest day at the World Chess Championship match. We will be resuming the recaps the day after tomorrow. So that's about it for us for today. We will see you in the next recap. See you guys.